It's fantastic to be here at our 12th Farmer in the Field event. And I'm Sarah Smuts-Kennedy. I'm an artist and I'm the vision holder of For the Love of Bees, Regenerate Now, and a co-creator with these great people and some others of the Urban Farmers Alliance. It's really wonderful to be here supporting Bailey and the work that he's doing in Christchurch using this this platform, which has been co-created by many of us to ensure that you as a grower have access to the knowledge that you need in a timely fashion at the depth that you need it, so that you can become part of this incredible movement using the food production to mitigate climate change. This platform has multiple entry points. We have a WhatsApp channel through the Urban Farmers Alliance that is giving over 100 members now peer-to-peer mentoring on a daily basis, which is then supported by this fantastic platform, the Regenerate Now Instagram, with our early adopter farmers who are sharing as they're learning. So it's the learning by doing. Today we're here with the farmers in the field, which enables our farmers to have a one-on-one mentoring session with 3 of our Regenerate Now mentors, which hopefully you can participate in through using the chat channel. And those of you who have turned up today, please use the chat channel to ask your questions so that we can really, you know, do as much facilitation of learning as we possibly can for our wider community. And then we have our masterclass series. And at the moment, you can go onto our YouTube channel and check out the first 3 masterclass series, which have been run by Daniel. It's really wonderful to be here today. I'm going to hand it over to you, Daniel.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you find this afternoon's session as useful as the previous. Are we on 11 or 12?
12.
12, are we? So if time's flying by very quickly, a week on week doing these. So yeah, my role in this is as a biological agronomist. So I work with all sorts of growers up and down the country, and so it's always enjoyable to look at all the various different projects that we visit in this Farmers in the Field program. So I really look forward to seeing what Bailey's got to show us this week. Take it away, Bailey.
Cool. G'day, everyone. I think there's a bit of a lag between my voice and the image, so we can get around that. Hopefully we can have a good session today. But yeah, my name is Bailey Peryman. I've been doing urban farming and local food stuff for 10 years. And actually about 8 years ago, in a hall just about 50 metres that way, there were some of the very first planning and conversations around the community food network for what is known as the red zone here in Christchurch, but it is formerly now known as the Ōtākaro Avon River Corridor. So the river is, oh, you're looking straight into the sun there. It's basically straight back that way another 100 metres, and there's approximately 100 to 200 metre wide strip of land either side of the river that has been cleared from the central city right the way out to the coastline, and that was as a result of in the large part liquefaction and slumping of the land after the earthquakes. The total land area is 400 hectares, and long story short, there's been a massive planning process, government agencies left, right and centre, all coming together to shape, work alongside a community, shape a vision for the regeneration of this area. And there's a lot more to be said about that, and previous history. as well, which I think I'll touch on now because it's important. But before I go any further, my role today and for the next 12 months is to work with some of the community groups and individuals that have proposed food resilience initiatives or projects as part of the broader mix of land uses and transformations of the land here. So my role is to facilitate, basically helping to make some progress with those. And there's a whole mixture of initiatives from kaupapa Māori school, aiming to feed 1,000 students in whānau every day, right the way to your average community garden type of setup, to broad mahinga kai, food gathering, ecological restoration projects, and beehives dotted throughout. So there's all manner of different types of projects that have been proposed and are already underway. And where I am currently is an area known as Wainoni, and there has been a community garden attempted just over the other side of the building and pointed out before, but that failed. There wasn't a huge amount of community uptake with that. And there are a number of barriers facing the community groups wanting to make some progress here, and particularly for the productive land uses, there's a bit of fear, I think, around what's in the soil, contamination, how much of the debris from housing that was cleared from these sites is still in the soil, and what, if any, contamination is there as a result, making it unsafe to grow food. And so the perception at the moment is that it's a really degraded, contaminated soil. Who knows what's underneath? Why would you bother? Let's just restore it as an ecological, restore the river ecosystem, which on the large part I actually support. There's plenty of space around the city to grow food, but there's so much of land here, and so some really amazing spots that are in close proximity to where people are living, good visibility, good access, aren't affected by flooding issues or drainage problems. They're just little sweet spots, and I estimate there's probably about 10% of the area, so a total of 40 hectares, which would be ideal. And a lot of that area is actually on top of really historically versatile, the class 1 and 2 soils that are most desirable for horticulture. So, and pre-urban settlement in Christchurch, the whole area, the whole river corridor was, well, first I think it was a transport corridor for Ngāi Tahu and visitors moving through the space, and navigated the area along the waterways, and it was obviously an abundant source of food. So there weren't many settlements. There were some but there's a really, I won't go. It's not my story to tell, but there definitely were settlements. A lot of them were, as far as I understand, were more for groups that are passing through on the way to trade in town, or other spots seasonally where whānau and hapu groups moved through this area. I think in recent history too, there was a lot of market gardening that happened, particularly in Chinese communities who were treated very poorly by the colonial settlers, and turned to market gardening as one of the ways to gain a livelihood here and some autonomy. And I think that history is actually shared across the country. So my specific challenge here today, as well as that big picture, navigating all the politics and the different community aspirations, of which largely food productive land uses are pretty well accepted, so long as we keep it back from the river and allow for the river ecosystem to really thrive. I think food production or productive land uses could have a role in that, in restoring the integrity of the river ecosystem. That's another conversation. Today, really, I'd like to focus on what's in the soil, what's in the ground, and getting a picture. There's some interesting stuff in there, but on the whole, it's otherwise a topsoil that's top 30 centimeters maybe has been fairly modified, but beneath that is is a great foundation for producing food. Yeah.
Thank you, Bailey. That was a really amazing introduction, and I think what would be, you know, obviously I think appropriate is to acknowledge, you know, the incredible work that's been done in Christchurch by so many different communities in this space. You've got the Food Resilience Network. You have, you know, you have so many fantastic projects, but they aren't necessarily connected, and they and also there's a real opportunity to contribute to those projects through the learning that we've all been doing through this program. So it's just tremendously exciting. There's no other city in New Zealand with quite as much greenland available. So, you know, Christchurch has an opportunity to become a real world leader in this space. So it's tremendously exciting for us all. Levi, you've joined us now. Do you want to just introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll move on to answering Bailey's questions.
Yeah. Kia ora all. My name's Levi. I've just arrived a bit late from OMG, Organic Market Garden. We've had a great day today, just expanding our vegetable beds, building some terraces, and yeah, working on some pretty tough ground, like you, Bailey. So yeah, awesome to be here, and yeah, really exciting to see the potential down there.
Potentially, that's a great place to start, actually, Bailey, in terms of what Levi has managed to do on a site that, again, had a very similar type of perception of its potential. So I think there's some really great correlations there between what we've done on OMG in such a short space of time and your site down there.
Yeah. So I'll see if I can flip this camera around and stop jiggling around and show you what I've dug into here. I dug a pretty typical, I actually dug this yesterday, I didn't use that. Basically that's about a 30 centimeter profile. I guess the recent history is this was housing. There were driveways, garages, backyard gardens, typical suburban Christchurch. When the houses were cleared, everything was bulldozed and sent to the tip, and then whatever debris left was usually scattered around the site. So you find bits of building material, with a bit of polystyrene there, and in the hole here you can see, I don't know what that is, but that's steel. You wouldn't want to bite into that. And yeah, then topsoil, a little bit of got to visit it. Little bit of topsoil was sometimes brought in, and that would have just been, you know, your average screened topsoil from who knows where, probably a subdivision somewhere else. That's the irony. Land topsoil was cleared from some other subdivision and brought here to replace housing, and then it was grassed, and ever since it's just been mown repetitively, and the edges, I don't know if you can make that out, but the edges have been sprayed. A lot of the mature vegetation was left, so anything above 4 meters, that was the methodology. So you can still see the pattern of the urban settlement pattern of the housing, but yeah, what we're left with, what I have to work with, is pretty good in my mind, actually. Like, there's going to be,
I was going to say that's probably better than the average subdivision would have in many parts of New Zealand after they've put housing in place and you know, after they've scraped all the topsoil off, built a housing subdivision and stuck some topsoil back on top of the clay that's left. That looks like a hell of a lot better starting position than.
That's the thatch, and you know, there's a bit of twitch in there, but
did you find did you find much in the way of worms or?
Yeah, so a hole like this is usually coming up with about
in the soil.
Yeah, there is. That one hasn't fared so well, but there's about, on average, 5 to 10 worms in a hole like this, which is low, but I mean for a pasture that's just been mowed successively, that's not too bad.
10 worms in a spades bit sort of size like that is probably better than you would find on the average of a lot of pastoral farms.
Yeah.
So it might sound low in terms of our ideal with 27, 30 plus, but you know, there's obviously a significant amount of life in that soil if that's the level of worm activity that's existing.
Yeah, and you know, like I can pick a piece up and you know, it's in the hand, and there's been very little rain here. And
it's got good crumb, it's got good crumb structure. It's sticking together and holding together, yeah.
And the other thing I've noticed is there's pretty good root penetration as well. Like, you're getting down into here. There's, you know, that's 30 centimeters down, and there's roots getting in there. So
yeah, it's interesting you talk about establishing, say, growing in the case of food production in an area like that. If you think in terms of what we're talking about these days, where we're not cultivating or trying to not disturb the existing soil that's there, obviously any more than it has been disturbed, or the recovery looks quite amazing considering the short amount of time that would have existed, is that if we're going up in terms of developing, you know, gardens. So if you're going to put a farm on top of that, if you're layering a layer of compost over the top of that and planting into it without disturbing that soil anymore, I think you've got the basis of an extremely good looking potential to actually farm. That's my gut feeling from what you're showing me out of that hole.
That's my gut feeling too, and I guess the main concern here is that okay, so there's typically elevated levels of lead that's been sort of spread around as they've leveled the sites before grassing them, and any of those other typical heavy metal contaminants. So I'm kind of wondering from here how, maybe what are some crops what some strategies that we could start with that isn't going to exacerbate or put me at risk of taking up any of that material or hyper accumulating any of that.
The interesting thing is, when you look at that sort of stuff, is that legumes are particularly good at dealing with heavy metals. At one stage, I looked at various different heavy metal contaminations on some of the building sites, and I can't remember off the top of my head now which specific ones we were looking at. I think we might have been talking about lead and it might have been arsenic or one other. But anyway, when I looked at it, even white clover is extremely good at sort of mitigating those sorts of issues. And you've got to remember that as soon as you take an inorganic compound and you start combining it with carbon, you end up with an organic compound. And an organic compound is basically microbial food. So, and if you look at the amount of life that you're looking at, if there were heavy metals that were going to cause significant issues, I really, really doubt that we'd be seeing the sort of soil life that you're looking at that would exist unless that system, was reasonably okay, I guess, is a basic term. If you really wanted to look at it, you could do soil analysis, which you may have already done to look at heavy metal contaminants, but that'll give you some sort of benchmark. But I would probably start with potentially growing a green crop of a mixed cocktail cover crop with a high degree of legumes in it, and do some leaf analysis on that crop. So that would give you some sort of benchmark to look at the values that you might find if you then started growing food on it. So you could do leaf analysis of the pasture, but I would want to see some significant length on that pasture. So you've got really good root depth there at the moment. So even leaf analysis on that pasture would give you some idea of the level of contaminants that might be found in food that you grew on that site, more than necessarily looking at it purely from the soil chemistry aspect, but actually looking at it from the food value aspect. Because, I mean, every one of those things we're talking about can be digested and consumed by the microbial network in the soil if it's healthy enough.
Daniel, I've heard that some types of brassicas, kale in particular, it has the ability to accumulate lead at a higher rate than other plants in the soils. Do you know if that's true?
Well, one of the,
if it is, then I was thinking chucking that in amongst the, like chuck some brassicas amongst the cover crop, and then do a leaf analysis of that, and then you're going to know.
Yeah, a cocktail cover crop would normally include some brassicas. So you'd be looking at legumes, brassicas, grasses, for argument's sake, and pseudopods. A full cocktail cover crop, if you could do it, would be ideal, even if you only did it in a sort of smallish space. And you only, after 3 to 6 months tested those individual species, it would give you a really good idea of whether you were getting different accumulation across the different species, and whether the accumulation would be of any concern from a food value perspective. I mean, all the sort of the compounds we're talking about all exist in soils at greater or lesser levels. All naturally occurring soil chemistry. So, I mean, even things like arsenic, all these things are natural chemicals or chemistry that exist in soil. And whether or not, something accumulates it more than others. We tend to use legumes for leaf analysis because they are the most likely thing to show us nutrient imbalances in the soil for one reason or another. And it probably has to do with their very close relationship that they have with nitrogen fixing organisms and just the process that they work through. But you're right. I mean, that cocktail cover crop definitely has to include brassicas, and it's just that leaf analysis. It would give you I think, a more complete picture than just purely doing soil analysis. And the interesting thing I would do is I'd also put an area of compost down that I grew a cover crop into, because that added a whole lot of soluble carbon and other nutrients into it, and as to whether that might, what buffering effect that might have, as opposed to just planting straight into the soil that's there.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that to establish, just to do a small area, maybe, you know, like a 40 or 50 meter length, and my thoughts have been to try to, I've just pulled the grass away like this, but to get it back to something kind of like that. There's actually quite a lot of clover and useful species in here, a lot of useful bit of diversity in here already. Plantain, I think this is dandelion. Yeah, so there's a bit of diversity here already, but imagine getting it back to something like that just through mowing. I'd love to bring a mob of sheep through here, but mowing and then broadcasting the seed, well, inoculating the seed, broadcasting over this, trying to roll it in or at least stamp it in, and then cover it over with a bale of straw and be able to just roll it out like bale grazing is done on sort of sheep and beef farms. But I'm just, I'm thinking of a method of testing a few different methods for how to establish that cover crop, do those those tissue analyses, and that as being a first phase.
Yeah, I think it sounds a kind of a sensible approach to it. I mean, just being able to mow the grass short enough, and I know on a broad acre sense, they would just simply use something like harrows to tickle up the surface of the ground prior to broadcasting. So like springtime harrows, something like that, or even chain harrows for that matter, to sort of scratch up the top surface that then spread seed into, and then roll that, or flip the harrows over and cover the seed the other way. Rolling the bale out obviously would help enormously to cover it with a bit of material on top of that, but it should do enough if you did it, you know, in early spring, to do enough to get it established once you got the soil temperature up, to, you know, help that germination happen. But as I said, I think you'd have leaves that you could test. I would, you know, in 3 months, but certainly by the time you're 5-6 months down the track would be more than would be about as long as that cover crop would need to be there to give you some idea of what that a meaningful tissue analysis would give you.
Okay, cool. I guess
Is it worth,
you go ahead, Levi.
I was just going to say, within that cover crop, would it be worth putting a chenopod in as well? Spinach, because I was just thinking they're you know, the beetroot, the spinach, the chard, all that. Because you basically just cover your vegetable bases, family.
Yeah,
I'd love some Solanaceae in there too, because I can sort of feel like there's going to be the type of crops that we're going to be able to do here, and not quick turnover leafy greens and salad mixes and things like that. Here I'm imagining going the whole chaos garden type of approach, where you're just putting a whole as much diversity as possible, and probably mostly larger seed as well, and growing things like squash and pumpkins and potatoes and corn and beans and peas and that sort of thing, that can just be open for the, well, assuming we get to the point where we're confident that it's safe to eat, that we can get to a phase where there's a crew who just broadcast and establish 1 or 2 crop rotations every year, and it's otherwise pick your own sort of set up. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to a point where it's commercially farmed, just because it is public benefit, but I'm sure there's a way we can get to a farming system that is highly productive.
It's interesting that you say that, Bailey, because at the moment I know that here in Auckland there's a big conversation around, farms and parks, which are, spaces for public benefit. There obviously needs to be some work done at the moment around the Reserves Act in regards to enabling these spaces to grow food in order for sale. But if I look at, for example, other businesses and public spaces here in Auckland, there is a farm on one of our regional parks, but also we have batches. We have batches that we rent out that make income. They make income for the city. So there's, one of the public benefits of that is that they get maintained so that they're able to be utilised. And I guess one of, like last week we were, and cafes as well. Somebody says, there are cafes on public spaces. So I guess, it's really interesting to be with Hannah and, her project last week, where they have, so many projects across so many sites. But one of the issues that they have are farmers who are able to, being able to employ farmers so that they're there on a regular basis. And I guess that's one of the really massive distinctions between a site like OMG and what you're talking about in terms of behind you, there was a community garden that only managed to get to a certain level of productivity, is to do with that very simple thing of it's either somebody's job, so they're there taking it to the next level, or it's a volunteer thing, which the energy fluctuates and comes and goes. What's your reservation around thinking about the possibility of sites like this, say there should be a shift in the Reserves Act, to actually rolling out these businesses that employ people that potentially are actually gifting, their profits actually going back into council to seed new projects?
There's two sides to that, I think. One is the current model, which seems to be that as a form of rent, you pay a portion of your revenue. From what I've heard, the model we're looking at here is around 4 to 4.5% of revenue is paid back to the landowner, whether that's the Crown or the council, or but a public landowner. Yeah. So that's one model being discussed here. But I think that the way the world is headed and the way our economic systems are headed is for a massive diversification of different ways of doing things. And in particular, the regenerative economy, I just think it's not going to be a dollar for a highly transactional system. Like I'm looking at getting a few pilots going here where we actually make compost on these sites first, and that's a civic service which might come with a fee, which we charge the city per tonne, but that is immediately creating value for the production cycle. And as we link that cyclic or that circular economy together, I think we're going to start to see different value chains and different perceptions on price for organic matter, for what waste, for our food, and yeah, and I fortunately I'm in a position now where I can explore that for a couple of years. All things going well, that'll be through a PhD, but just through trialing these different systems and mainly focusing on training people in regenerative practices. I think that's often the common thread, and as well as that being about a specific local community which has specific social dynamics and cultural dynamics, which mean that there's no one model that works. It's actually, there's just loads of different ways of doing it, and the main thing is that it keeps going, that it works for that community. And I guess we've also got the added factor of there's just so much change happening that who knows. So what works now might not be what works in 10 years time. So I think I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't. It's really, I think the value is, and say the value of per kg of food or per kg of organic matter recycled is going to shift, going to change when it's placed in the context of this is about regeneration. This is about ecosystem restoration first and foremost.
So your kind of ecosystem restoration is going to be measurable based on above ground dry biomass per square meter per year, right? So in terms of, you know, in terms of, that's a really great way of measuring what's actually happening on the site, right?
Yeah, there'll be multiple yields from that point of view. And then, of course, there's that wider discourse around the benefits of adding soil organic matter or increasing soil organic matter content, and the benefits for water infiltration, the reduced runoff of sediments into the river. It'll be really immediately obvious for people, and in this context, because you know the river's right there. You can just point it out. You can point out these processes, and I think that's the first wave of this era of a whole generation of transition or transformation towards regenerative practices. I think the first wave of that is going to be a massive reskilling and upskilling and reconnecting people to the fact that these are possible and that life isn't futile. Life is actually insanely fertile, despite how many different ways we've tried to stuff it up as humans. Yeah. That's the context. That's the context here. Like, I'm sorry, Levi, you go. I do have one other specific question around any risk of tubers or root veggies perhaps swallowing up bits of glass or nasty things. Like I saw there's this funny story doing the rounds on social media a few months ago about an old woman who found her wedding ring in a carrot. The carrot had taken the wedding ring up out of the soil and thought it had been lost forever. But yeah, I would hate for somebody to bite into a beautiful carrot and find a piece of glass. Much like, you know, the stuff that I'm getting here is, you can see there's little bits like that.
I mean, think in terms. think in terms of if you've got small rocks or pebbles or sand, for argument's sake, in the soil, carrots don't end up full of sand, don't end up full of rocks, don't end up, you don't, the way that the process happens is that I can't imagine why. I can imagine a carrot growing through a wedding ring, because it's a circular thing, but it's not actually absorbing it, because, I mean, carrots typically grow in very sandy soil. So why don't you bite into a carrot and basically get a mouthful of bits of sand? That just isn't a process that I think is likely or even possible to occur. So I think you're pretty safe in respect, probably because the fact that those veggies actually grow from the inside out. They're not actually growing around something, they're actually swelling from the inside out. They're pushing stuff away, not imagining to wrap things around. So I think that is extremely, I can't imagine really the scenario where that would occur will be a problem. I can understand the concern because it's, it sounds horrendous, and when you really think about it in terms of how that vegetable or those vegetables grow, no, they're more likely to push away. And the thing is, like, carrots are notorious for hitting anything from bits of bark to whatever, to actually, you might end up with a bit more deformed carrot because it'll hit something like that and sort of grow, push away from it. But I also think that you really have to think in terms of the fact that when you start growing, because we don't want to encourage people to till that soil, we're basically going to go and grow up above the soil that's there. And yes, we'll have roots going down into it, but the vast majority of what we're dealing with will be growing kind of in that, as that compost that we lay on top of it, or the cover crops that we compost down into that whole is a whole carbon cycle. And the hydrological cycle is very much in terms of being a downwards thing under gravity. And yes, there is an upwards thing, but that's coming up through the roots in the plant. And again, the way that roots function and grow is they'll grow around things, not as a tendency to, it's not like they're going to suck up lumps of glass or and everything that comes through the plant comes via the carbon cycle. Every organic mineral is being broken down by microbes, is being digested by another organism that's come soluble, that's fed to the plant, is all coming as organic chemistry into the plant. And then the completion of the hydrological cycle is when the plant respires. So the potential for that whole accumulation issue and all the rest of it, I think it's an understandable sort of concern, but in a practical sense, I think you'll find it's extremely unlikely to cause issues unless the concentration is absolutely off the scale, massive, and then you'll tend to find what grows in that area has probably got other issues that are going to cause it to be unproductive. If it's that far out as in toxic, I just doubt that when you think about all the processes involved there. Your biggest concern is that if that inorganic chemistry, for argument's sake, is in a soluble form, is that the hydrological cycle will be basically ending up with that in the stream. So if you were to test the water at the moment in the river and that sort of thing, if you were picking up any really concerning levels, you will find it in that part of the cycle. So you could do some water analysis in the process as well. But that could be coming from a long way upstream, so you'd have to take it in multiple places down the stream. But yeah, it'll be an interesting, certainly an interesting process. Just to make a comment on regards to, this public space and the use for urban farming and that aspect of it. I mean, one of the things, of course, the whole governance structure has a problem with at the moment is the fact that they're all short of funds to manage these spaces. And money is significant cost associated with mowing 400 hectares of red zone. The way they're treating. What's that?
$4 million a year.
Yeah, and then if you look at the carbon associated with that as well, none of that's positive. we've got this lovely big green space, but everything about it is essentially expensive, environmentally, potentially, negative because of what we're doing with it. If we can turn that around so it becomes a positive thing, both from an environmental and a social aspect, as well as potentially negating the massive costs associated with it, just by reimagining the whole concept around what we think of that space could be used for. You can imagine a whole raft of things, but I still can imagine urban farming having an absolute essential role. And it might say, 10% of the land area, but to think that we have to continue mowing the other 360 hectares on this ridiculously regular basis just to maintain it, to me is part of a fail. It's not a sustainable plan. As a design, it's not really for the future. It's not really a sustainable option.
So if you looked at just 10% of the 10%, so that's just, so you've got 40 hectares that you think could be urban farming, and then 10% of that was run as a similar project, say an OMG or something like that. How many jobs would that create? Just looking at, the opportunity to create the social good through multiple means. You did some wonderful calculations around profitability on land that I thought it'd be really interesting, because I know that there'll be people who will go and watch this particular farmer in the field, because they're interested in the possibility of what could happen in Christchurch, and also interested in Bailey's research. I thought it'd be interesting to just insert some of those figures for people so that they can just get their heads around various possibilities. Daniel, are you able to just quickly do that for us?
Sure. So what you're talking about is 10% of the 10%, so 1% of the total area, being 4 hectares.
4 hectares.
If we assume the 4 hectares are 100% in production, just from the simplification of maths process here, and then we had 4 hectares in urban farming actually in productive use, then what we're looking at is something conservatively between 40 to 50 jobs, full-time jobs, and those are based on $25 an hour, 40 hours a week. We are looking at the turnover. Hang on, let me just quickly run through. But one of the examples I was using, times 40 times 4 times 52. So what you're talking about, just in terms of our modelling on CSA boxes, which is potentially producing, that would be 4 hectares. You're talking 1,600 CSA boxes a week. You're looking at over $3.3 million in turnover of that 4 hectares. A business model looks very different from conventional business models. But the interesting thing is, like 4 hectares, you're getting that 3.3 million. There are other things you could do on that site. That's just the basing point that we start with. But so it's $832,000 a hectare turnover. To give you some idea, and one of the figures I like to give people is, how does that compare to conventional large scale or even intensive horticultural systems, and without greenhouses involved, but just outdoor production? And something like gold kiwi fruit, the absolute max they could do out of that, which is one of the highest value crops you can grow, is like $300,000 a hectare. So we're talking about more than their average is actually less than 200,000 across the kiwi fruit industry for gold kiwi fruit. So we're doing 4 times the average of New Zealand's most valuable horticultural crop in terms of, because of the intensity of our farming systems. Because we're talking about, we're not losing masses of space or using masses of big machinery. It's all about incredibly intensive production to show you the productivity of that sort of space. And we're producing food 12 months of the year rather than a single crop of kiwi fruit. There's lots of other examples that you could use as a comparison, but to give some idea of the sheer commercial possibility of a space like that. So is that sort of information you wanted, Sarah?
Yeah, I just think it's really good to insert that, and in terms of looking at 1% of it, just sort of, it doesn't, it's just, I think, a really great way to start imagining what's possible, because I like the fact that, 4 million is used to mow it currently, and 1% of it could potentially produce, 3/4 of what the maintenance cost is currently of it. It's a great way to start reimagining the use of space. Now, I know that we've got about 7 minutes left. Hopefully, if Bailey's phone still has battery.
I'm
what
good
are the
here.
other? Okay, cool. So, I know that Levi had some things that he wanted to contribute in there, but also, what are the other things that we want to really investigate in the last 7 minutes that we have?
I had a couple of things. I don't know if I missed it in the beginning, Bailey, but do you have permission to be on that land and to use that?
Yes.
Okay. So you can
not,
not mow.
I have permission to be here right now and dig a few.
No.
But
To do a cover crop.
So not yet. There's a brilliant organisation here post-earthquake called Life in Vacant Spaces, which is able to broker access, and I've started a conversation because the land is still Crown land. It'll be transferred to council pretty soon, but I should be able to have one lease where I can get access to multiple sites to do composting trials, and I'd like to add, yet to propose this yet, but like to add some of these no-till bioremediation strategies.
Because that's what we did at the farm, and that's like, if I was to start a farm anywhere, that would be my first thing, which is to plant plants that of great diversity that grow to a great height, produce a lot of biomass, and just let them grow, let them get those sugar exudates into the soil, and then compost them right there and then.
Yeah.
And with your thinking, Daniel, like if they are accumulating lead or something, that composting process, taking that crop then through a composting process would also ensure that they bind with the organic matter and get it into the system.
Yeah, it'd have an effect if you grew a crop and you found that it was high in a heavy metal and you composted it. What you'd have the effect of doing is diluting that heavy metal out over, because of all the other components that you would bring into it, the carbon sources and everything that wouldn't have that. So you kind of, without doing anything else, it would be putting it through another organic carbon filtration system. So it's already gone through one to get into the plant. Then composting it makes it go through that process again, and you'd be diluting it with other things. So as I said, I think that potentially is certainly a strategy that might work if we found the issues. So there's certainly, the answer is definitely in using the microbiology for that remediation process.
It could be wonderful, Bailey, to find a piece of land that has really high levels and to actually do some tests there to see, you have a real opportunity to do some great research around these things at the moment on those sites.
Yeah. But the other thing was that I think is forgotten so often, is if you're going to start doing that on that site, like to do like a traditional cover crop where you've got to worry about getting a head start on all the weeds and suppressing any weed species pressure you've got there in the first instance. Like, man, we just need to look at the goal to do composting and cover cropping for years. We need to start looking at perennial species, perennial grasses, clovers and stuff that will just grow back, Jerusalem artichokes, sunflowers, really, really grunty stuff that requires less work for you to do it. Like mustard's great, but it's going to grow and then it's going to die, and then you're going to be left with a patch of soil again. So what species can we be planting? What grass species? What nitrogen fixing shrubs and tree species can we be whacking in there? I know there's a handful up in Auckland that I know that grow well that I'm going to get experimenting with here. But yeah, I mean, what about wattle or willow, or I don't know, anything like that, that just grow and produce you everything that you need, and then all you need to do is come down, chop it, and compost it.
Yeah, I like
Rather
that
than doing that
suggestion.
whole process again of getting the seed and preparing it, and
Yeah,
if it is a
yeah,
long-term goal.
yeah. There's definitely that's some of my thinking. Some of what the other local farmers as well, suggesting similar things, and I think it's also looking at it as what can be done mainly for the benefit of the ecosystem, which also a byproduct of which is food. Just prioritizing the soil and the land. The other thing I like a bit what you're suggesting, Levi, just and Daniel, with the cover crops, is you're going to show up the places where there are, it was an old driveway or a thoroughfare or something, which is like, right, well, we ain't going to dig that out, but at least 90% is all good.
I've noticed
Yeah.
stuff, and that's something that I've noticed at OMG as well, is that you can actually, that's actually a good thing. When back when we were initially doing it, we had a soil that was like amongst all the rubble, there was some nice soil there, but there was a lot of chunky rubble. Like there was huge amounts of areas you couldn't put a spade in the ground, and at that time, what we did, because we didn't have access to huge amounts of composting material to build up, 40, 50 centimeters, I just got teams of people in and we dug it all out. But interestingly, you'll see all that. You can actually map all that by sowing a cover crop and letting it grow out. And we would have cover crops that would go down like that, and you'd actually see lines, full lines running through it of where bricks and rubble were, where a road was, all that sort of stuff. So that could be really cool. As well, there's huge amounts of variations that we saw in particularly the brassicas and how well they grow in certain areas. And I think I reckon there's a whole science to using cover crops to learn about nutrient deficiencies in the soil as well as what's actually underneath there, because certain plants that have tap roots won't grow that well, and we'd experience massive height differences with clearly delineated lines that can give you a really good idea with what you're working with. The areas of even growth is obviously what you want, so
I'd actually be surprised if they saw that as much on this site as you probably did, as you might do in OMG, because what we're looking at here is an awful lot more topsoil than OMG had at any point. So it depends where we are on the site. There'll be obviously different scenarios, but that's I mean, at the moment, there's no sign at the moment that you actually had any sort of real clay yet. That appears to be 30 centimeters of topsoil. Well,
you get a bit of this.
Well, did you do that? If you did that in Marlborough, you wouldn't have actually got that far down until it was solid rock anyway.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, exactly.
You see the holes we dig here. By the time you get down that deep, we're using like a demolitions bar to break the rocks out of the bottom of the hole.
I think
we've had a few comments through the chat channel, and I just think we've asked people to contribute through that, so I just want to is that tansy and woodworm has been suggested by Prashanti, And Catherine has said that she has a friend. There's actually an area of study for that, which is called terra aquaculture, which basically is reading the landscape, doing that kind of strategy. Sorry to cut you off, Bailey. I think we are looking at kind of wrapping up here. Do you want to do a little bit of a wrap up, Bailey, on what it is that you have kind of your thoughts as a result of the conversation?
Well, the key thing for me is kind of validating some of the thinking that I had been doing. My main concern was whether plants were going to swallow up bits of glass and things like that, but that's been pretty firmly debunked, and with a very, very simple explanation. So thank you for that, Daniel. Again, it's coming back to those core biological processes, and once you understand those cycles and how they actually work, then you can give a pretty straight up response. And yeah, a bit of a method around the plant tissue tests, and how to set that up, going for the more legumes in that first plant mix. And yeah, loving those suggestions. Levi, your experience with how the plants are going to tell you about what's going on underneath. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, my hope is that in 6 months' time, might be able to show you some trials that are underway. If I have to fund those myself, I will. But there's a few resources around. They don't need to cost a whole lot. Bit of seed, do some lawn mowing to prep the ground, and I think I really want to roll bales of hay over the top. See if we can. We're not going to have water, so I'm going to assume that we're going to do this relying on the natural hydrology of the site, which means, I think, encouraging roots to go down. And using the straw as a mulch, and not only to suppress weeds, but to protect from bird strike, but also, reduce the amount of evapotranspiration. So
it's going to be all about timing.
Go for it, Levi.
Oh, I said that's going to be all about timing. There'll be a window, and you'll have to hit it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Back in farmer mode instead of running an organisation mode, which I'm really happy to. It's cool. I want to take back that responsibility of being there at the right time for the purposes of farming. Yeah.
So Bailey, we have, in fact, Levi and I have been part of creating a tool called a pasture painting, which is essentially what you're looking at doing. And the tool already exists on the For the Love of Bees website, but it could be a wonderful way to create some socialization events with schools, where you can give people a chance to create their own design using colour and height and all those sorts of things. It might be a way of taking some extra work away and opening up that socialization aspect of what you're wanting to do there.
That's a brilliant suggestion. I love that.
Yeah,
Cool.
a 400 hectare pasture painting would be quite impressive.
Yeah. Oh, even a 4-hectare one would be amazing. So yeah.
And it ties in with the beehive concept that they have and the pollinators. Sorry, Levi, go.
Oh, I was just saying, lots of people don't. Your standard farming cover crop that people do is, that they only want it to last so long. But we found out with the pasture paintings that you can do one sowing. I don't know what it'd be like in Christchurch. It'd probably die off at some point. But in Auckland, I've sowed once. And it's lasted 12 months, and I've had successive crops coming through with no weeds. Everything I've sown. It's just about getting those species in at the right time and staggering them.
Yeah.
And then the kids save the seeds and start all over again.
Yeah.
And actually,
Yeah.
Bailey, it's a wonderful tool for, you can do things on bee month, get the kids to come, the schools to come down and actually count the pollinator species, collect data, but also be doing a worm count before and after. And a lot of them are making worm tea, so they can actually come with their worm tea and do liquid fertilizer feeds as well. So there's lots of, you know, ongoing rhythms that you can create using that strategy. I'm so excited that you're going to be spending the rest of the week, Bailey, taking us to various sites, and obviously, you know, sharing what you think's possible in them, but all sorts of other amazing stuff. We're really lucky to have you moving into this kind of research and facilitation space for your local council and community. And you know, it's the recovery plan that we all wrote together with the recovery farms becomes possible when these sites start to, you know, become available. So for those of you who don't know what the recovery plan is, we'll make it available this week via a link on the Instagram as well, which Bailey's been a big part of creating. Well, I think that's a bit of a wrap up. I think it's been a really fabulous conversation, and we look forward to next week being with our next farmer in the field with Anna Dadson, who was one of our first facilitators under the For the Love of Bees, and she has been learning alongside all of us for the last 3 years, and we'll be going to Kerry to see her project up north. So that's tremendously exciting too.